We've all got an imaginary friend, right? Yeah? Yeah? Just me? But if you have, is yours a dragon? Hello and welcome to the Friday Fantasy Show from the Bottled Imp, exploring the realms of fantasy. My name is Ken Boyter and today we're going to run off into the woods and try and find Pete's dragon. Yes, but this one, it's not the 1977 Disney sort of animation stroke live action version, which was a musical. This one is a remake. Yes, in 2016 Disney decided they were going to remake it. They've been remaking a few of theirs. Like, for example, The Jungle Book, they remade that, but instead of it being animation, because the original Jungle Book was completely animation, they did that one as a live action, fully live action. So, is this any good? What is the point of remakes? Let's find out. Pete's Dragon, the Disney remake of their own film that is based on the 1977 story. I don't believe it existed before that. It wasn't like it was a book or a novel. This remake was directed by David Lowery. So what's the setup of Pete's Dragon? Well, as you can imagine, there's a boy called Pete and there's a dragon. Well, Pete names the dragon Elliot. What happens is Pete is in the back of a car. They're driving along with his parents. It's all happy. They're obviously very loving parents. And he is reading a little book that he likes to read in the back of the car. And they're going on a camping trip. They're going on an adventure. So it starts off and you think, oh, this is nice. And it starts to border on being a little bit too sugary, a little bit too nice, a little bit too, really, are these parents for real? They seem too nice. And then Disney does something that it doesn't often do. It kind of does. And I think people forget that Disney can be a little bit sharp or a little bit, it hits you in the face. Well, this wasn't quite in the face because this isn't a spoiler. This is literally within the first 2 minutes. A deer jumps out in front of the car and the car flips. The deer manages to escape unharmed, so I guess that is a bit Disney because, maybe a full-on deer hitting a windscreen and everything might be a bit too much. After all, this is a family film. Anyway, the car is totaled, it's flipped. And we don't quite know what happened. They don't cut back to the parents, but it's implied that they have perished in the car crash. Pete, fortunately, manages. He's got out. He was thrown out of the car, and all he's got with him is his little backpack and his book. Now, at this point, he's 5 years old, so he's obviously going to be scared. He's obviously going to be frightened. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. And he starts hearing some noises, and they're in a wood. This is just a single track kind of road in the middle of a wood. And so he panics and he just dashes off into the wood. Unfortunately for him, there are wolves, and the wolves start closing in on him, and it's looking pretty bad for Pete. But he is saved, because in the distance you hear this boom, boom, just trudging, this heavy noise. And through the woods you see trees start falling down. And the wolves, they get scared. It's their turn. And they all cower and they run off before they can attack Pete. Because right in front of him is a huge dragon. Yes, it's Pete's dragon. Well, it's not his yet. It's not really his anyway. But anyway, he befriends. There's a little bit of a bond. And there's a little innocent. He asks, are you going to eat me? He looks up at it. And the dragon's kind. He's friendly. He's not going to eat, a defenseless child. So they bond. And fast forward 6 years later, we see that they've bonded well. A little bit like Mowgli from the Jungle Book. He's been brought up in, not a jungle, but the woods by the dragon, who he names Elliot, which is one of the characters in his book. And there's some beautiful sequences where they're running through the woods and they're enjoying each other's company, and they're by a lake, and he jumps on the dragon's back, and they're flying through and they're having a whale of a time. And they spend their nights in the cave, or they fall asleep, and Pete reads Elliot the book, the storybook, and it's all very lovely. Obviously, it's a film, it needs conflict. You know that's not going to last. There's going to be people that discover Pete's dragon. And that's kind of the setup. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but you can kind of maybe guess where the whole story goes from there. There are themes that run through this, which is nice, and it's good that Disney, obviously, Disney do emotional themes. They are a good, film company that does that. They know the craft of stories and the craft of characterization and what makes a good story. There's obviously the theme of loss. You lose your parents in a car crash, especially when you're 5. That's going to have an effect on you. That's going to traumatize you. And yeah, Pete, he does have flashbacks. He has flashbacks of, from what he can remember, being tucked in by his mum, or especially the car crash. There's a few flashbacks that go on there. So because this is a family film, obviously they have to do it in a very sensitive way. They don't go into too much detail about it. But at the same time, they do acknowledge that obviously that's going to start affecting a child. So he's 11 years old when the main bulk of the story kicks off, and he has not come to terms with the loss of his parents, obviously, but he's got a new life. He's got a new way of living, and he just discovers a way of living with the fact that he's lost his parents. And because he's 5, he didn't really remember too much before anyway. So as far as he's concerned, it brings in this new theme as well, the theme of community and the theme of social living. Now his world is very narrow, some might say, because it is with a dragon. It's not a community of humans. He hasn't seen anyone for years. That's the impression anyway. So you've got this sense of, well, let's look at the question, what is a community? Does it have to be of your own kind? So I guess it touches on race and I guess racism as well. So you have, and because, Elliot is a dragon, so he's not human. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to Pete. It's how you bond, it's how you forge those communities and how you build those communities, and it's all based on love and kindness and just being gentle and kind to each other. There is also the theme, it touches on cruelty and hunting, because as you can imagine, at some stages, as I say, adults get involved, and there's a bit of hunting going on. So there's the kind of evils of hunting, and I guess why do men, especially men as opposed to women, but some women presumably hunt as well, why they feel the need to go and hunt something. If you see something, the otherness, the other, something or somebody that's different from you, as I say, like a different race, why you would feel the need to be aggressive towards it. Why don't you, come with peace? Why don't you try to establish a dialogue? So that's an interesting concept as well. And there's a slight, it doesn't really go into environmental issues, but there is a logging company as well that's destroying the woodland. So it touches on that ever so lightly. But the way it does deal with the main theme is obviously this loss and community and sense of belonging and sense of family. It does it very well. It does it in a very gentle way, and it does it in a grown-up way. It doesn't patronise any children that would be watching. So it deals with the themes in a very beautiful way, in a way that you would expect, in a grown-up kind of way, in a grown-up kind of manner. The story and the characters, yes, they're lovable, they're believable. The film is actually set in 1977, which obviously they've tied it in with when the first film came out. But the first film, the animation one, which was live action and animation, that actually was a musical, and it was set in the 1900s, so they had already time travelled back and set it in a different era anyway. So it was an intriguing choice to set it in 1977. I'm not sure why they wanted to do that. It didn't really add anything apart from, and maybe this is what they wanted to do. The film reminded me of E.T. You've got this creature that's lost, that gets picked on basically and bullied because it's different. That's as simple as that. So like E.T., they try and capture it, they want to run tests, etc., etc. So maybe they were trying to evoke that sort of feeling, and it had also that feeling, as I say, the Jungle Book, it shares that sort of, a boy being brought up by people other than humans. So it has that references as well. So maybe they wanted to just firmly plant the film's feet in that camp and say, yes, you've seen those films, you're going to be happy with this. This is the territory that we're actually exploring. But I don't know if it needed to be set in 97, because I was slightly confused. I was thinking, really, has nothing changed in America? The police cars look all similar. You know, has nothing changed in 30 odd years? And then I realised, oh no, it is actually set in that era. But they did do a good job of it, because it did have that nostalgia type feeling. It sort of also reminded me of the pacing. It did remind me of that type of film. The pacing was slower than a modern day family film. And so it did have that chance you could breathe in the scene. But I don't know if that necessarily was warranted in this sort of film. Because on the one hand it was an action film, so there was lots of running about and the dragon flying and fighting. But then at the same time it was kind of sensitive, because it was dealing with Pete's loss and that need to belong and the family unit. So it kind of flitted between the two, and it did work. My only reservations were, it kind of ticked all the boxes. It wasn't anything remarkable. It didn't blow my mind. I didn't go, wow, that is absolutely amazing. And you know, and I was wondering why. And it's like, well, it's almost like, it almost felt like doing a film by numbers, like a formula, almost. But there was enough going for it where it elevated it above that. I think one of my biggest qualms with it was that Elliot, the dragon, he wasn't charming enough. He didn't speak in this one. I believe in the 1977 film, Elliot actually spoke, the dragon spoke. This one wasn't. So they wanted to do a more realistic version, and that's fair enough. But the dragon was furry. And that, again, you're right, you know, it's a fantasy thing if you want a dragon that's furry, but I just think it was a wrong call. It kind of looked, so the fur was meant to be cute, but then his face didn't look cute, so it was like a contradiction in what they were trying to do. I would have preferred it, scaly and more of a traditional dragon and more cute. Not more cute, but more friendly maybe. It just didn't have any character or personality, which I know sounds bizarre when you're talking about dragon, but if you look at, say, The Hobbit, where the dragon, the Smaug there, that's personality. Okay, an evil one, but there was personality, there was character. And that's why I think was lacking. I didn't feel an emotional connection there. So for me, the film was okay. It was fine. It was nothing, it certainly wasn't a bad film. The production values were excellent, the acting was brilliant, all the kids were brilliant in it. It was a very, very good job, but it just wasn't enough to kick it above the touchline. That doesn't make sense. I don't know what that means. Raise it above a kind of, it is above average, but it's close to being average. I wouldn't say it's an extraordinary film. I would imagine if you've got a child that has never really seen a lot of films, maybe they're 5 or 6, they would love it, because there's enough in there for them to be enthralled by it. And it's lovely. The CGI of the dragon, they've done a good job. It doesn't look plasticky or cheap or lightweight. It looks like a proper dragon in terms of the physicality of it and the way it interacts with the actors, so you don't get put off by that. Special effects are great. It is just one of those films that hits the mark but doesn't do anything more above it, but it is solid. I do recommend it. But you know what, I tell you what, I saw the Jungle Book remake at the cinema and they did a phenomenal job on that. It was as good as the original animation, if not better. If you hadn't seen the animation, your mind would be blown. I kind of expected that. I wasn't given that. But saying that, certainly if it's on telly, put it on, kids will love it. It is worth seeing. It's just not worth raving about. There we go. That's Pete's Dragon. Pete's Dragon. Yes, there was a question as well about imaginary. Is Pete's Dragon actually part of his imagination in order for him to actually cope with his loss of his parents? No, they didn't go down that theme, they didn't go down that side of the story, because other people do see the dragon. Also recently that came out, A Monster Calls, similar sort of thing. There's a boy and there's a monster and again it's that, is it imagination, is it not imagination? That one's a little bit more clear cut in terms of, it looks like it is imagination. It's a good way to cope with trauma. So it's interesting why they didn't really go down that route. Maybe for another film, maybe the sequel, who knows. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that. We have got lots of other reviews. I think there's over 270 episodes we've now done. We also do a fancy news show every Wednesday, quite aptly called The Fancy News Show. Remember to subscribe and all of that, and tell your friends if they're into fantasy as well. Until next time though, remember to keep it unreal, especially if you're a dragon.